Hi everyone and welcome to Dance Podcast Season 3. I'm your host, Jasmine Cook. This is a dance science podcast presenting discussions with global industry leaders, aiming to make research and information more accessible and enhance dancer wellbeing, health and training at all levels of the sector. New episodes every Monday, 6 a.m. London time. Hi everyone and welcome back to another episode of Dance. I'm here tonight with Kathleen, who I will let introduce herself, but I'm super excited for today's episode and today's topic, which is on mental health in dance and Kathleen's work for Minding the Gap. So Kathleen, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi Jazzy, I'm thrilled to be here.
If you just give a little intro to yourself, so if you tell our listeners a little bit about what you do, your kind of journey through dance, how you got to where you are now.
Sure, for sure. So I guess I'll kind of work backwards. I'm the founder of Minding the Gap, which is a social good company that is focused on seeing mental health regarded with the same seriousness as physical health in dance culture. I founded Minding the Gap, when I guess it was at the very beginning of 2019. So it's been an interesting time to be starting a startup. But it's really never been more important than it is now with the pandemic and everything. I myself was a classically trained ballet dancer. I left home at the age of 14 to train at Pittsburgh Ballet Theater School in their pre-professional division. And then when I was 17, I moved to San Francisco to train with San Francisco Ballet School in the highest level of their pre-professional program. So, I was in a very competitive ballet dance environment from a really, really young age, and without the immediate support of my parents and, many of my friends I had grown up with. So it was a very challenging time in my life. And, looking back, I can kind of say now that I know I was a really good dancer. I was a very promising dancer. I definitely could have done it. Right. But I got injured. My first year in San Francisco before we went in to do Nutcracker. And the injury really derailed me. It really took a lot of my confidence away. I didn't really know how to deal with the feelings I was having. When you're an injured dancer, you're completely severed from your identity in a lot of ways because you can't dance. So what value could you possibly have, and all of those missed opportunities. And you're even separated in a lot of ways from your social group because you're not having that camaraderie in the studio you're used to. And I was already, I didn't have very much confidence or self-esteem even going into this. So really that injury led me into my first major depression, which I didn't know it then has really shaped everything I've done since. I became a writer for Dance magazine. And really the reason I started Minding the Gap was after all these years of writing about mental health for the magazines, I wrote an article in 2017 called "Why Are We Still So Bad at Addressing Dancers' Mental Health?" And that article went viral, which really took me by surprise. But the reaction to that article is really what made me feel like, wow, like this is a big, big problem, and it's not just me, and I'm not alone, and I need to do something to try to change it. So that's why I started Minding the Gap, and it's kind of what's led me here.
Yeah, definitely. And there's so many things in there that I want to kind of unpack today, and I'm so excited to be speaking with you. So you mentioned you were professionally trained and you left home age 14. Can you tell us a little bit about how this influenced you? So you said that you remember it being very competitive. Do those kind of memories of school influence the work that you do now? Just a bit about what that was like leaving home so young and how it impacted you.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think one of the big challenges for dancers, especially in a pre-professional setting, is that they're taking on the kinds of challenges that most adults or high performers don't try to accomplish until they're older, right? So you're 14 and you're leaving home the way someone might leave home to go to college, right? and you're not in the same place emotionally, developmentally, and a lot of things. And then your teens and early 20s, when dancers are going through the most rigorous parts of their training, are the period of time in your life when you're most likely to have your first mental health issue. So, it's kind of um, a a perfect storm of possibilities for mental health issues, and the competitiveness definitely contributes to that. So in my own training, yes, I mean, when I think back on that time, I mean, it makes me a little bit sad, because I wish that I hadn't been so hard on myself. I wish that if I could have valued myself more, um I would have been happier, and I think I would have probably danced even better. And um, I think that's part of what drives me to do this, and part of the lens that I bring to this is that, when I see that dancer in the studio with their shoulders down, or holding back the tears, like I see myself in that dancer very much, and I know that it doesn't need to be that way. I think that if we can teach dancers healthy coping skills, in the same way that we teach them how to cross train their bodies and use a TheraBand and all of those other things, if we can also teach them, things like managing self-talk, and teach them to broaden their sense of identity, and think all of these things that contribute to making someone emotionally and mentally more well. um, there's going to be a lot fewer sad dancers out there. And, there's direct correlations between injury and mental illness. And so there's benefits there too. So yeah, I see myself, the work that I do, I definitely have the lens of my experience kind of always in front of me. But that being said, I also, um, we do a lot of surveying of dancers. I talk to a lot of dancers, because I also recognize that my experience is not universal. And also that, I was dancing quite a while ago, 15 years ago. So it it's different now in some ways. And in some ways it's really not.
Yeah.
So I try to be an open receiver of that information as well.
Yeah, something else you mentioned last time we spoke is about the need for validation, which I think is something that a lot of dancers possibly struggle with. How does this influence your work now? So seeing that in your younger self, and then seeing that in dancers now.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's huge. Yeah, I really, when I was dancing, I really needed the validation of the person at the front of the room, of the casting, of my level placement, of all of those things. I attached those directly to my personal value, not just as a dancer, but as a person, right? And none of those things are in my control, right? So I can't help or control how how the teacher is going to perceive my dancing. And it's so subjective, right? But I would fixate on these teachers that I felt didn't like me, or some of them didn't, because nobody likes everybody, right? But I I just fixated on it. It made me feel terrible. Um, and I think that impacts me and kind of affects me now, because I'm so much more aware of checking in with myself and being like, is that about me? Really? Am I wasting my energy being upset about a decision that's not mine, or something that I can't do? Um, for as many people that are thrilled, dance leadership that's thrilled to work with Minding the Gap, I've had others who flat don't want to, right? They don't agree with what I'm doing, or they're afraid of what I'm doing. And if I were to take each of those rejections personally, I wouldn't be able to do this anymore. So I definitely try to remember that, right? And remember that I can only control what I can control. And that I think as I've gotten older, and this is advice I give to dancers a lot, that actually one of my collaborators, Dr. Lee Scavarla, brings up a lot. Um, and that's to ask yourself who's on your board of directors, right? So like, if Jazzy is this big corporation, and there's this big boardroom with the big windows and the long table, who's sitting at the long table, right? And I think sometimes when you think about it, some of those people are at the table that you didn't put at the table. But why? Why are they there if it's your table, it's your board of directors? So I think too, it's like, does this person's opinion really matter to me? Like, yeah, they may have power, they may have the ability to cast you, and yeah, that can be very frustrating. But like, do you actually respect their opinion? So I think I try to do that as well. And it's a process, right? This is all a process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a good thing to think about. Yeah, who's on your board of directors and why they're there. I love that. I'm going to take that into my own life.
Mhm.
So could you tell us a little bit more about, I'm sure listeners have read it. So you started writing for Dance Magazine. Tell us about the start of this. So before your piece that went viral, how did your writing sort of grow in your time there?
Sure. Yeah. So it's so interesting because people will ask, like, well, how did you become a dance writer? And my answer is by accident. When I left dance, I was done with dance. I wanted absolutely nothing to do with it. I I've been writing in a journal during some of the most difficult times in my life as a dancer. Rather troubling to read now, but I when I was thinking about it, I'm pretty sure it was my mom that asked me this. Well, what else do you like to do? What else makes you happy? And that's something that I don't think a lot of young dancers think about very often, which by the way, you should. And I was like, well, I guess I like writing in my journal. So I decided to go to school for writing, but I was actually a fiction major. I wanted to write novels about, you know, people completely unlike me in places completely unlike where I was, and definitely didn't want to write anything about dancing. And I felt like fiction would be safe for that. And I was really wrong about that, because the second you get into fiction class, they're like, so write what and they were pushing me really like to write about dance. And so I was kind of like, all right, fine. If I have to write about dance, I want to do nonfiction. So I started taking tons of nonfiction journalism classes in addition. Um, when I graduated, which was right around the Great Recession, great timing. Um, I was trying to figure out how to get published, because it feels like you have to be published to get published. So like, how do you get on that carousel? And one of my advisors was like, well, go get an internship, and I was really interested in magazine writing. I'm like, well, what magazine's going to give me an internship? And I was like, well, I don't know. I mean, I know a lot about dance. Maybe, maybe I should try Dance Magazine. And I got the internship, and I was kind of like, whoa, boy, like, what did I just do? Is this a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, I was very excited, but I was also kind of, not sure if I was ready to re-enter the dance world. I even had kind of a pact with my friends who were still dancing. They had to tell me, if you want me to be at the performance, you have to say, Katie, this is important to me. I need you at the performance, because otherwise I'm not coming. Like, you're going to have to say that. Like, and so anyway, so I started the internship at Dance Magazine, and it was a absolutely incredible experience. I got to assist at Paloma Herrera's cover shoot, and I got to see 9 to 5 on Broadway before it had officially opened. And, like, it was very exciting. And I felt really supported by the editors. And, I started writing about, at first it was just kind of news pieces. And then eventually, after I had finished my internship, I wrote my first article on a mental health subject. I think that was in 2010. And I've been writing mental health topics almost ever since. I asked my editor in chief at one point, this was when Wendy Perrin was the editor in chief. I was like, Wendy, why do you keep assigning me mental health topics? Like, I'm a mess. Like, I'm like the last person in the world that should be should be telling people about how to manage their mental health. And she was like, well, maybe that's why you're so good at writing it. And really, through the process of writing about dance and mental health and dance, I came to my own realizations about my own life, that I had quit dancing because of untreated depression. I was depressed. There was a name for how I was feeling. And it was not, you're just not tough enough. It was, you are sick, you are depressed. Like, this is treatable. This is something that can be better, and so I had that realization. And then also I realized that for once, like in this world where I felt so voiceless, I had a voice now, and I had a platform, and I had a place to say things. And so I kind of got more and more kind of, I don't know what word to use here. I got, I guess, a little braver, brave and stupid. The line's really thin, and I'm just gonna walk on it. But yeah, it really thrills me to have the ability to try and answer the questions that I wish someone had answered for me, to look for the solutions that I wish I had had, and to just generally support dancers, because I genuinely just really love dancers. They're just really wonderful people.
Yeah, I'm like loving listening to your story. I just think it's an amazing story. And I think it's really empowering as well that you found that way kind of as an outlet, and to change sort of such a negative into a positive in your life, which I think is amazing. Can I ask you a little bit more about, so I'm going to put this as a question to you. If you had to give me, first of all, a short answer, if I asked you, why are we still so bad at addressing dancers' mental health, what would your short answer be? Obviously, there's not a short answer, which is why you wrote about it. But if you had to give one.
You're right. And like I wrote 1,500 words. So no, the short answer is, I think, because we treat dance like it's this glass globe, right? And if we try to change it, or if we try to put it in a new situation, or if that it might break, right? So we don't want to lose the good, so we keep the bad, because somehow we think that is protecting the art form, but it's not. And it's hurting people. It's making people who should live their lives loving dance forever and buy tickets and be donors and enroll their kids, it's making those people not be lovers of dance forever. It's making it difficult for dance to stay relevant in a very changing world. We're starting to see changes in that. That's probably the shortest answer I can give. And I know that wasn't even that short.
Okay, that'll do. I'll take that. That's fine. So could you tell us a bit about the article? And then obviously it went viral. So what happened with it?
Yeah, the article, so interesting. So the current editor-in-chief of Dance Magazine is Jennifer Stahl. Sorry, I've known her a long time, so I call her Jenny. But she, this was around the time, 2017. It was around the time they were starting to put more stuff online, and they started doing op-eds, which is something they hadn't really done a lot. And so Jenny sent me an email one day and was just like, hey, Kathleen, like we're going to start trying out some op-eds. If you ever have something you feel really passionate about that you want to write about, I'd love to see it. And I was just like, oh boy, do I have something to say. Because I was just, honestly, when I sat down to write that article, I wrote that article in under an hour. It was like less than an hour. It just poured out of me. It had been brimming inside of me for a decade of writing, right? And but at the moment I wrote it, I was quite angry, because, as someone who's kind of has a bird's eye view into the dance world now, right? I'm not a dancer anymore, but I'm friends with dancers, and I interview tons of dancers and leadership and medical professionals. And it was just so frustrating to me to see this glaring problem, to know the experience that I had, to have talked to other dancers and realized that it wasn't that different. And then to spend all this time interviewing all these brilliant mental health professionals who love and care about dancers, and to hear them say things like, it's hard to access the dancers. I've offered my services. It just enraged me, because I'm like, the problem is here. The solution is here. Like, just you can't see me, everyone, but I'm using my hands to smush them together, So I was like, yeah, I have an opinion. And I sat down and it just poured out of me. And I remember I went to, I sent it to my editor. She did a couple little edits. And then I went off to a wedding in Montreal. So I was like kind of checked out, I was at my friend's wedding and with, having good food and wine and having a good time. And then all of a sudden I got a text from the editor in chief, and she was like, oh my God, are you seeing this? And I was kind of like, what? And I'm like, oh no, what's happening? Like, am I getting like lampooned all over the internet right now? Because it was a very vulnerable article. I shared my own experiences, very like laid myself bare. And to the contrary, it was incredible to watch. And I may have read almost every comment. If, so if someone out there, like if you commented, if you said that it meant something to you, I very likely saw it, because to say that feeling of support and camaraderie I had after being so vulnerable in such a public way is one of the greatest kind of moments in my life. It's also a very sad moment, because all of these people are connecting to something about me that is very painful. So it was very motivating. It was very motivating.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll link it below in case, I mean, I'm sure everyone's read it, but in case people haven't, leave a link in the show notes so they can go and read it as well. So what drove, you then did a follow-up survey after the article went viral. So what drove this? Was it kind of the outpouring around it? And then also what was found from this survey?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I think the article, so I'm not a scientist, I'm not a medical provider, right? Like, but I am kind of a data nerd. Like, I really like data. I like testing assumptions, and I also feel that it's, there are people that don't want to believe that this is an issue. Dancers are so resilient, and we have to train them this way to make them tough. And this is the way it's always been done. And, and so with those kinds of arguments, there are people that I think just very plainly don't want to believe it's a big problem. And the only way I could think to refute that was to get data. And as you know, I don't need to tell anyone listening to this podcast that there are amazing dance researchers out there doing amazing work. And I will say, when I first did this survey, I hadn't gone to the IADMS conference yet. I hadn't kind of like cracked into that community fully yet. But I wanted information, and from what I could tell, and this is true, there's very very little data on dancers' mental health, and even less on their mental health in the United States, where I live. So, I asked Dance Magazine, I was like, if I made a survey, would you post it? And, because the article was so well received, they were like, yeah, definitely, let's do it. We've got this momentum. The magazine was thrilled to feel like they had, through this article, had helped contribute to starting a really meaningful and important conversation. And so Dr. Brian Goonan and I created a survey and put it up there, and we had just under 900 responses to the survey. And really, I wanted to know what the experience was like for dancers now. I know what it was like for me, but that doesn't mean that that's what it's like for everyone, right? So the Dance Magazine survey that we put up on the website, we received just under 900 responses. And, some of the questions we asked, like, have you dealt with a mental health challenge in the last 5 years? 75% of those dancers said yes. And 14% said maybe, which is like kind of a yes, right? And so I was like, okay, this is, I wanted to test my assumption that this was a big deal, right? Like, am I just, I'm getting all this feedback from people that feel the same as I do, but is it really as big a deal as I feel it is? I asked, does your school or company have a psychologist or other mental health professional the dancers are referred to? I was interested in this one because I can't tell you how many times I interview dance leaders, and I started doing this many years ago, mainly out of curiosity. I would just ask them, oh, do you, even if it wasn't part of the topic, like off the record, not part of the actual interview, do you have a mental health provider that you refer dancers to? I'm just always looking for people to interview like that. And I can't tell you how many times they would they would say yes, but then there was no trace of this person. Like the dancers had no idea they existed, or they couldn't remember there's one school, I'm not going to name names, but their psychologist, their referring psychologist has been on a vacation every time I've emailed them, and I've never received the person's name. Like, it's incredible. So I kind of just wanted to test this again. Am I right about this? Like, because the other thing is that the places that do it well and do have a referral for a psychologist or a mental health professional sometimes just don't communicate it very well to the dancers. So it's like, yes, you know that person's there, but the dancers don't, right? So does your company or school have a psychologist or other mental health professional? 75% of the dancers said no. And let's see, 13% said maybe. So 12% of these dancers were like, yes, we do, which I thought was troubling. I know how to reach that person directly because I'm curious, right? 37% said no. So I'm not going to do math here, but of the 12% of the dancers who said yes, they have a mental health provider that they can be referred to, 37% of them don't know how to reach that person. So that was troubling. And then I asked if they would be comfortable. Would the dancers be comfortable reaching out to a teacher or director if they had a mental health issue? And let's see, 10% said they definitely would feel comfortable. The other 90% are either not at all, unlikely, or maybe. So, and this goes back to, do you know how to reach this mental health provider? Because if you don't, now you have to go to this teacher, and only 10% of the dancers are going to do that. So, and I won't go through the whole thing, but that's some of the stuff that I was really interested in. And, the curiosity in that was, what are the problems? What are the gaps in this breakdown between the people who can help and the people who need the help?
Yeah, definitely. It really reminds me of, was there a survey more recently, so like this year maybe, by a dancer? I feel like they were in America. I can't remember her name. And she was like a dancer. I think she was about my age. And she did this survey for mental health in, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, that's Maddie. What is her last name?
Yes,
I
yeah.
think it's Maddie Blast. Maddie Blast.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
She's a dancer in California. She and I chatted following that survey that she did that went really viral. She had over 1,000 responses.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because there were a couple of her questions that weren't the same, but quite similar to the ones that I had done. And her outcomes were almost exactly the same.
Okay.
So yeah, and this is really like, citizen science, right? Like, this isn't, me and Maddie aren't scientists, right? Like, we're just curious people who put this information out there. And the thing is that those surveys tend to do well, to get big responses, because it feels connected to a person who's more like a peer, rather than it being like the University of blah de blah de blah, right? And it's interesting because one of the things I'm really passionate about, and one of the things that Minding the Gap is trying to kind of marry the information and tools and skills and work of the academic and scientific communities with kind of the advocacy of the dancers' peers, and understanding that the information feels quite siloed sometimes. And so one of my goals always in my writing and in my work is to try and bring this information that I have had the privilege of receiving through all these interviews and stuff to the people who can actually use it. So yeah, it was my first attempt at my own research, and yeah, it went well.
Yeah, definitely. I love that you've spoken to Maddie. Yeah, I love that. Could you, on Minding the Gap then, can you tell us a little bit more about it? So give us a bit of an introduction to it, what it is. So it's kind of, you said, I think last time, so it's advocacy, research, and consultancy. So what are your aims with Minding the Gap?
Absolutely. So really, I saw that there was this need, there was this hole of, like I said, getting the providers and the information to the dancers, and access to dancers is really, really challenging. I think probably everyone listening to this episode, unless you are, have the benefit of being employed by a dance organization, it can be very difficult to gain access to the artists or the students. And so it started off kind of as advocacy. It started off just as me being like, okay, every time I talk to a director, I'm going to try and convince them that they need a referral for a mental health provider. I'm going to just talk and talk and talk and talk about this until I'm blue in the face. And then it kind of morphed into, social media presence and putting together resources. And then, the research, doing the survey, and then I'm sure we'll talk more about this later, but we are now in the midst of a 3-year longitudinal study of the dancers at Point Park University's dance department, which is one of the top 5 collegiate dance programs in the United States. But I wanted more information because it helps my advocacy, right? So the advocacy then turned to, okay, well, now I need more information because it's going to help me advocate better. So I started going after the research. And through the process of doing the research, what we're doing at Point Park essentially is installing a robust mental health program. So the idea is that these dancers will have the same level of access to mental health information and providers as they do for physical health. So, if you can go see a PT for a knee injury, I think you should just as easily get to go see a licensed social worker or psychologist for a mental health issue. And so through the process of doing that, we have been learning how to create this kind of program within a dance institution that we hope will fundamentally change the culture to honor mental health in a completely different way. And then from there, we've started working with other organizations and schools and companies. Sometimes we just do a couple of workshops. Like, I don't want to scare anyone off from that. Like, something is better than nothing, right? If you want to do some workshops, start with some workshops. Happy to do that. But our goal is systemic change. And what I would like to do is to partner with organizations to build these kinds of programs, to look at their policies, to learn from their dancers and their teachers. One key about the work that we do is we don't only work with the dancers, we also work with the teachers. So yeah, that's kind of what we do.
Yeah, so could you tell us a little bit more what mental health research is out there already? What are the gaps and why? Well, I mean, I suppose it's kind of obvious, but why is it important that we begin to fill this?
Yeah, so there are, I will say, the first time I went to the IADMS conference was in Montreal in 2019, and I was just kind of dumbfounded. Like, I was walking around this hotel ballroom, like, there are 600 mental health there are 600 dance scientists and dance medicine experts all together in this place. And I felt like, I don't know, I felt like I had like discovered a cave, like, like the fairies are real. They're over here, and I just kind of wanted to be like, guys, they don't know you're here. Like, what are we doing here? So I think that really, really opened my eyes to the possibilities, right? And I got to meet these researchers and providers, and the group of people that are as obsessed with dancer mental health as I am exists. It's a small but very, very mighty group of people. There's some fabulous research on perfectionism, and creativity and eating disorders. We do, we look at eating disorders quite a bit in dance research. Um, Paula Thompson out in California has done incredible work around PTSD and adverse childhood experiences. So we have some really good stuff, right? A lot of it is focused around perfectionism and eating disorders, which is great. I mean, look, dancers are at least 3 times more likely to have an eating disorder than someone in the general population. It is right and makes sense that we are looking at that, right? I think from my perspective, as important as it is to understand the rates of eating disorders and the types of eating disorders and the prevalence of them, it is equally important to understand the building blocks to making those eating disorders, because I want to deal with the dancer's anxiety and all of these other things that contribute to having an eating disorder. And I feel like if we could give them better coping skills at a younger age and create safer, mentally safer dance environments, the eating disorder rates would go down kind of naturally, systemically, right? So what I was really hungry for is information on depression and anxiety. At Point Park, our research is looking at depression and anxiety, social physique anxiety, so how you feel when someone's looking at your body, self-esteem. That's one I was really eager to get some data on. What am I missing? Oh, coping and resilience. So, I really felt that some of those, there were some holes there, and I wanted to contribute to finding some answers, because I'm just a very stubborn person. It's just like, okay, nobody can give this to me, so I'm just going to go get it myself, right? And I go stomping off into the corner. And through discovering the International Association of Dance Medicine and Science and PAMA, and yeah, I actually presented at PAMA in 2019. And I mean, that was just an incredible experience, and I was completely terrified because, I'm in a room full of all of these folks who do this for a living, who are brilliant researchers. And I'm like, here's my survey from Dance Magazine, I was so incredibly nervous, but I was very accepted. And I think actually a lot of the providers and researchers that I've interacted with really appreciate that someone outside of academia, that someone outside of their bubble is like interested in it and wants to talk about it and wants to try and implement what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I bet. Could we go into that a little bit now? So could you tell us a bit about the data, some of the highlights of the research? So the main areas you said the focus was earlier, so anxiety, self-esteem, social physique, anxiety, sort of the stats around those different areas.
Yes, absolutely. So before I go through the results, I should say, and this is very important context, that we did this initial survey on the dancers in November of 2020. So, we're in the very early stages of the pandemic. We don't have a vaccine yet. Here in the United States, and actually, I mean, all over the world, we had some serious reckoning with racism and, the murder of George Floyd. And, it was just a really intense time. So we have to always remember that when we're looking at this. But the dance program at Point Park has that year, last year, they had about 315 dancers in the program. And the dancers, they have areas of study. So they can do ballet, they can do modern, or they can do jazz. And ultimately, this was, an institutional review board approved study. So this was not compulsory to take this survey. 78 of the dancers took it. Well, actually 106 took it, but 78 of the responses were complete enough that we used them for the research. So not a bad sampling of that body of dancers. And, the results were, yeah, it's sometimes I don't want to be right, but the dance students overall showed poor mental health when compared to the normative data for the same age group. So, and that was just overall across the board. And again, we did overall kind of mental health. We used the RAND mental health survey, which includes anxiety and depression and other things. We did body physique anxiety, self-esteem, coping, and resilience. And they fared poorer than their peers across the board. In some cases, depending on the measure, we were able to compare them to other college students. And in other cases, we were just able to compare them to people of the same age. 48% of the dancers showed high levels of anxiety. This one, I mean, that's 48. I mean, it's almost half. And I was surprised. Anxiety was quite high. I mean, again, the time we're living in. Depression was closer to kind of what we would expect. So this was definitely a time where the anxiety was the thing of major concern. So in our sessions, we take all of this data and we use the data to inform the sessions we're going to do, what we're going to do in that session. We're constantly looking at the data for what the pain points are and trying to think about what we could do to alleviate those pain points. So like, for example, we did one of the sessions with Dr. Bonnie Robson was just breathing. We just did 7 breathing techniques because we were seeing this high level of anxiety in the dancers. 44% of the dancers showed low self-esteem. This one, get ready, Jazzy. 55% of the dancers had high social physique anxiety. So again, that's how you feel when someone's looking at your body, which is a little troubling since, dancers by definition have people looking at their bodies all the time. So that was an upsetting one. And again, this is a place where it's like, okay, let's get to the root of these eating disorders. Self-esteem, how you feel about yourself and value yourself, how you feel about your body and your body being viewed. I mean, if we can address these things, we can prevent some eating disorders, we hope. 21% of the dancers showed low resilience. And this one, one of the things I hear most often from dance leadership who thinks what I'm doing isn't necessary or doesn't necessarily agree with it. What I hear so often is we have to train them this way to make them resilient, but dancers are so resilient, or, but here we go. They're not, according to my data, not as resilient as we all seem to think that they are. Ballet students showed poorer mental health overall than their peers in jazz or modern dance. That one, unfortunately, did not surprise me terribly. But what was very interesting is if you go back to the social physique anxiety scores, ballet dancers paired for poorer, overall, except in one measurement, which was social physique anxiety, where ballet, jazz, and modern dancers, their scores were almost even across the board, which I think surprises a lot of people, right? Like we think about ballet dancers being, of course, like the white leotard and, of course, the ballet dancers are going to have a harder time with this. But the truth of the matter is that no, jazz and modern dancers are going through those things just as often and feeling just as, kind of badly about it. So that was a really interesting learning for me, that, that anxiety, that physique anxiety, goes across areas of focus.
Yeah, definitely. Was there one more area of focus as well? So was it the coping skills, which I guess is kind of like a, I can't think what the phrase is now, but it's a positive and a negative at the same time, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. So in coping, there was some good news in coping. There was some bad news too, but good news in coping, they were using pretty adaptive coping skills. You could tell from the scores that they were at least trying. They were really trying to reframe things in a positive way and to use some humor and stuff like that. Substance abuse, use of substances, drugs and alcohol was very low on the list, which again is great. You love to see that, right? Especially at a time when the data is showing us across the world that we're all drinking more and stuff like that. So that was great too. The thing that was a little troubling though is that the most commonly used coping skill was avoidance. Essentially, this isn't happening. And that is troubling because it's not an adaptive coping skill, right? Like this is not like, you can't get through something in a very positive way by pretending it's not happening to you, right? And it's something that we do when we're traumatized, when we're dealing with trauma. I was actually just listening to Paula Thompson, who's done tons of work around trauma, on a different podcast the other day, and she was talking about the kind of the way that is connected. But so that was a little troubling. I mean, it was really good to see that they were definitely trying, right? And they were doing their best. But it was also, it helps to inform us what we need to do to support them.
Yeah, and I guess it's kind of also troubling in a way that the coping skills need to be strong. I suppose you'd hope that they wouldn't have a need for the coping skills in the first place, but I guess that's not expected either. So yeah, it is. Yeah. I said, and that's kind of all my questions today, really. I don't know if you have anything else you want to mention or discuss. I said off recording a minute ago, I've just loved this conversation today. I think it's, well, firstly, really important to have and such an important topic, and I could talk to you all day about it. And I definitely feel like a part 2 could be done. But I think as well, it's your passion about the topic. I think it really comes through, and I think that's why you speak so beautifully about it. So thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else you'd like to mention or discuss, or maybe a key takeaway message?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like I started off very focused on like, I'm going to help dancers, right? And I was thinking very much of like the sea of individuals. And the more I've done this, the more I've recognized that this has to be systemic change. A big focus of my work at this point is working with teachers. And actually, I am having my first publicly available teacher mental health workshop series. So if you go to wearemindingthegap.org, you can find that. If you'd like to experience what it's like to be part of the teacher side of the work that Minding the Gap does with the companies and schools we consult with. But, recognizing that I can help a dancer, right? I can help a dancer find a therapist. I can teach them all the good coping skills that are possible, right? But if they're just going back into a studio every day in an environment that isn't supportive of that development, you can't go swimming without getting wet. And I want to change the pH in the pool.
That's such a nice way to put it. I love that. Thank you so much, Kathleen. It's been so great to chat today.
Oh, thank you, Jazzy. This was wonderful.
Chat soon. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening. Tune in again next Monday. And in the meantime, follow @Side Dance Podcast on Instagram. It would also be so appreciated if you have a moment, if you could please rate and review on Apple to help the podcast grow. Bye.